Mr. President, this is the 11th day of the Trump presidency. To say that these have been tumultuous days is certainly an understatement. And what happened over this past weekend really was unsettling to many people all across the United States. Candidate Trump had made it clear that he had strong feelings about refugees, strong feelings about immigration. But I don't think anyone anticipated the executive orders that were issued by the Trump administration, by the president, on Friday. The net result of that we saw across the United States at O'Hare Airport, JFK, Dulles, so many other airports. International travelers en route learned that the laws in the United States were being changed because of President Trump's executive order. As a result, there was a lot of confusion, uncertainty, and hardships were created. Individuals who were coming to the United States as refugees were being turned away. For the record, Mr. President, this decision to indefinitely suspend the admission of Syrian refugees into the United States is not a decision based on fact. Since 9/11, since the war in Syria began, we have not had a single, not one instance of terrorism by a Syrian refugee, not one. The United States has not stepped up, as other countries like Canada have, in admitting Syrian refugees. We have gone to great lengths, extraordinary lengths, to give background checks that are as consuming as one can imagine, to verify their identity and their safety to the United States. Overwhelmingly, these Syrian refugees are the victims of a deadly war which has gone on for years, and overwhelmingly, they are children with their mothers. I've met them. I sat down with them in Chicago. It's heartbreaking to think that they lived through war, may have been lucky enough to make it to a refugee camp, and then waited for years to be cleared by the United States and given a chance to come to this country. It has to be a heartbreaking process. And through it all, many of them have endured losses in their families which they will never be able to forget. Injuries and deaths of people that they love. These are men and women in Syria escaping a deadly war and the terrorists who have ravaged that country. And they tried to come to the United States for safety and security. Mr. President, the history of refugees in America is one that in modern version is very admirable. But unfortunately during World War II, it was a sad chapter in our history. Not only did we inter about 120,000 Japanese Americans in camps during the war for fear that they would betray the United States, but during that war, time and again, the administration of President Roosevelt as well as Congress refused to allow those who were escaping the Holocaust in Nazi Germany to come to the United States. Here on this Senate floor where I stand, an effort was made by Senator Robert Wagner of New York to admit 10,000 Jewish children out of Nazi Germany into the United States so that their parents would have the peace of mind that they wouldn't be killed by the war or the Holocaust. That measure was defeated on the floor of this United States Senate. Prior to the war, our entry into the war, those who tried to escape Nazi Germany and come to the United States were turned away by the United States. The most notorious example was the SS St. Louis, which sailed from Germany, came to first Havana, Cuba, then to Miami, Florida, and was turned away in both places with about 900 passengers who feared for their lives because of the anti-Semitism and the killing that was taking place in Nazi Germany. They tracked that passenger list. Several hundred of them were rejected by the United States. They were not given refugee status. They were forced to return to Germany, and several hundred of them perished in the Holocaust. It was after that bitter experience that the United States decided that we would try to set an example for the world when it came to compassion and humanity for refugees. We stepped up, time and time again, stepped up to be that place of security and safety. We can point proudly to the fact that when the Cubans were fearful of a communist takeover in their country, fearful for their lives and their rights and their liberties, they came to the United States in tens of thousands. Now Cuban Americans, a proud part of our country, not only in Florida but around our nation, can point to the U.S. refugee policy as really the means by which they finally made it to the safety of the United States. Here we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. Cuba, 90 miles off our shore, was being taken over by a dictator, Fidel Castro, who was declaring his loyalty to the Soviet Union, and yet we were readily receiving tens of thousands of refugees from Cuba in the midst of that Cold War. Talk about a chance and taking a chance. These men and women who came to the United States were not vetted for months, years, in many cases not at all. They were allowed into our country. Thank goodness we did it. It was the right thing to do. And time and again, whether it was refugees coming in from Vietnam after the end of that deadly war, or whether it was Soviet Jews persecuted by the Soviet Union trying to escape, coming to the United States, we opened our doors and said the United States of America will set an example for the world when it comes to refugees. That defined who we were and who we still should be. And now this new president is ready to walk away from that. If we had one instance of a Syrian refugee coming into the United States after that vetting process who caused harm to our citizens or engaged in an act of terrorism, if we had one, then perhaps this president could start to make his case. All he has is fear, unreasoned fear, unproven fear.